My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I'm 26 years old. Right now, I'm sitting at a table with the hotel staff in the corner of this ballroom, watching my own family celebrate my sister's wedding 50 feet away. I'm wearing a borrowed dress from the hotel's lost and found because my bridesmaid dress was mysteriously damaged last week. My dad decided I wasn't worthy to sit with the family after I supposedly embarrassed them. My sister Stephanie keeps shooting me triumphant looks from the head table, knowing she's finally won. I'm about to leave this humiliation behind when an elegant older gentleman approaches my table. "Miss Thompson," he says with authority that makes the entire staff straighten up. "I'm William Morrison, owner of Morrison Grand Hotel. We need to talk. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next when this mysterious hotel owner reveals a secret that changes everything. Let's get into it. 3 months ago, my life was completely different. I was working as a marketing coordinator at a small firm downtown, living in a decent apartment, and planning a future with my fiancé Jake Martinez. Jake was a firefighter, 28 years old, with the kindest heart and strongest moral compass of anyone I'd ever met. We'd been together for 2 years, and I thought I'd finally found someone who loved me for who I truly was, not for what I could provide or how I could enhance their image. My family consisted of my father Robert Thompson, who owned a successful construction business, my deceased mother Sarah who had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, and my younger sister Stephanie, who was 23 and had always been the golden child. Dad had built his construction company from the ground up and was proud of his middle-class success, but he had developed an obsession with social status that had only gotten worse since Mom died. Stephanie fed into this perfectly, dating men from wealthy families and constantly talking about designer brands and exclusive events. When Dad announced Stephanie's engagement to Derek Hartwell, whose family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, the entire household shifted into wedding planning overdrive. Derek was 25, conventionally handsome, and came with a trust fund that made Dad's eyes light up like Christmas morning. The engagement ring alone cost more than I made in 6 months, and Dad couldn't stop bragging about his future son-in-law's connections and financial prospects. That's when the subtle comments about Jake started. Dad would make remarks about how firefighters barely scrape by and how I was settling for less than I deserved. He'd point out that Jake drove a 10-year-old pickup truck while Derek had just bought Stephanie a brand new BMW as an engagement gift. The comparisons were constant and cruel, but I stood my ground because I genuinely loved Jake and believed that character mattered more than bank account balances. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening in February. Jake came to my apartment looking pale and shaken, his hands trembling as he sat on my couch. I'd never seen him look so defeated, and my heart immediately started racing with worry. He stared at the floor for several minutes before finally speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "Becca, I have to tell you something, and you're going to hate me for it," he began, his eyes filling with tears. "Your dad came to see me at the firehouse yesterday. He offered me $20,000 to break up with you before Stephanie's wedding." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the room spinning around me. Jake continued, his voice breaking. "He said I was embarrassing your family's reputation by being with you, that I was holding you back from finding someone worthy of your social class. He said if I really loved you, I'd let you go so you could find someone who could provide for you properly." The betrayal cut deeper than any pain I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about Dad disapproving of my relationship. This was about him actively sabotaging my happiness and using money to manipulate someone I loved. Jake hadn't taken the money, but the damage was done. Dad had poisoned what should have been pure love with doubt and shame. Jake kept apologizing, saying he should have told me immediately, but I could see in his eyes that my father's words had affected him deeply. When I confronted Dad that night, he didn't even have the decency to deny it. Instead, he doubled down on his position with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "That boy is a nobody, Rebecca," he said with complete conviction. "You're my daughter, and I won't watch you throw your life away on someone who can't even afford to take you to a decent restaurant without checking his bank balance first. I'm protecting you from a lifetime of struggling to pay bills and wondering if you'll have enough money for your children's college education." His words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what mattered to me, but more importantly, they showed me exactly how little he thought of my judgment and my capacity to make my own life decisions. The fact that he'd gone behind my back to offer Jake money proved that he saw both of us as objects he could manipulate rather than people with agency and feelings. Dad had spared no expense for Stephanie's wedding at the Morrison Grand Hotel, the most prestigious venue in our city. The total budget was $150,000, a sum that made my head spin when I overheard him discussing it with the wedding planner. The ballroom could accommodate 300 guests, the catering menu featured dishes I couldn't even pronounce, and Stephanie's dress alone cost more than most people's cars. Despite everything that had happened with Jake, I was still expected to serve as maid of honor. Stephanie had insisted, claiming she wanted to heal our family bonds and show everyone how close we were as sisters. I should have seen through her manipulation, but I was still reeling from Dad's betrayal and desperately wanted to believe that at least one family member truly cared about me. The wedding planning process became a special kind of torture. Every meeting was an opportunity for Dad and Stephanie to remind me of my failures and shortcomings. They'd discuss Derek's generous contributions to the wedding fund while pointedly mentioning how Jake couldn't even afford to take me on a proper vacation. They'd plan elaborate engagement parties and pre-wedding events at expensive venues, knowing that my salary couldn't stretch to cover the expected gifts and outfits for each occasion. My best friend Madison had been my lifeline during this difficult period, or so I thought. We'd been close since college, bonding over our shared love of mystery novels and terrible reality TV shows. Madison worked in human resources at a mid-sized company and had always been someone I could trust with my deepest fears and frustrations. When the family drama escalated, she was the one I turned to for emotional support and honest advice. I started noticing subtle changes in Madison's behavior around the time wedding planning intensified. She'd ask very specific questions about my conversations with Dad and Stephanie, probe for details about family financial discussions, and always seemed particularly interested in any conflicts or complaints I had about the wedding arrangements. At the time, I attributed this to normal friend concern and appreciated having someone who seemed so invested in supporting me through a difficult time. The truth revealed itself in the most painful way possible. I had gone to Madison's apartment unannounced one Thursday evening, hoping to surprise her with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. As I approached her door, I could hear her voice through the thin walls, and something in her tone made me pause and listen instead of knocking immediately. "She's definitely getting suspicious about the bridesmaid dress situation," Madison was saying to someone on the phone. But I told her it was probably just bad luck with the alterations shop. She bought it completely. There was a pause, then Madison laughed in a way I'd never heard before, cold and calculating. "Of course I'm keeping track of everything she says about you, Stephanie. That's what you're paying me for, isn't it?" My blood turned to ice as I realized what I was hearing. My best friend had been recruited as a spy by my own sister, reporting my every private conversation and vulnerable moment back to the very people who were making my life miserable. The betrayal felt even worse than Dad's manipulation of Jake because I had chosen to trust Madison with my deepest fears and emotions. I confronted Madison the next day, armed with what I'd overheard and demanding an explanation. Her face went pale when she realized she'd been caught, but instead of showing remorse, she became defensive and almost angry with me for eavesdropping. "Stephanie promised me a job at Derek's company if I helped her understand what was really going on with you," she explained as if this justified everything. "You've been acting so paranoid and jealous about the wedding that your family was genuinely worried about your mental state." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. Madison was trying to convince me that spying on me and reporting my private conversations was actually an act of concern for my well-being. She claimed that Stephanie had only asked her to keep an eye on me because the family was worried I might do something to sabotage the wedding out of jealousy. This revelation explained so many things that had seemed like coincidences or bad luck over the past few weeks. Stephanie always seemed to know exactly what bothered me most about the wedding arrangements, and she'd bring up those specific issues during family discussions as evidence of my negative attitude. Dad would reference complaints I'd made privately to Madison during his lectures about my behavior and attitude. They'd been using my own words against me, filtered through Madison's reports and stripped of context to make me appear petty and vindictive. The psychological impact of discovering Madison's betrayal was devastating. She hadn't just violated my trust, she'd weaponized our friendship against me. Every conversation we'd had during the most difficult period of my life had been performed under false pretenses. She'd encouraged me to share my feelings and frustrations, not because she cared about supporting me, but because she was gathering intelligence for people who wanted to use that information to hurt me. Stephanie's response when I confronted her about Madison was pure manipulation masquerading as innocence. She claimed she'd only asked Madison to check in on me because she was concerned about my emotional state following the breakup with Jake. According to Stephanie, she'd noticed I seemed angry and resentful about the wedding, and she'd wanted to understand if I needed professional help or family support to work through my feelings. But the timing of Madison's recruitment told a different story. Looking back, I realized that Madison had started asking probing questions and reporting my responses right around the time I'd begun questioning some of Dad and Stephanie's more extravagant wedding decisions. They hadn't been concerned about my mental health, they'd been concerned about maintaining control over the narrative and ensuring that any criticism of their choices could be dismissed as jealousy or emotional instability. 1 week before the wedding, I received a devastating phone call that would become the catalyst for my ultimate humiliation. Mrs. Chen, the seamstress who had been handling all the bridesmaid dress alterations, called me with trembling in her voice. "Miss Thompson, I'm so sorry, but something terrible has happened to your dress," she said, clearly distressed. "Someone came into my shop and deliberately damaged the fabric. There are strategic cuts that make it impossible to repair, and with the wedding so close, I won't be able to order replacement material in time." When I arrived at the alterations shop to see the damage myself, my heart sank completely. The beautiful sage green silk that had taken weeks to order from the designer's showroom was slashed in multiple places, with cuts positioned precisely to destroy the structural integrity of the garment. This wasn't accidental damage or a random act of vandalism. Someone had deliberately targeted my dress with surgical precision to ensure it couldn't be salvaged. Mrs. Chen showed me the security footage from her shop, which revealed a woman entering during business hours while Mrs. Chen was in the back room. The figure kept her face turned away from the cameras, but her build and movements seemed familiar in a way that made my stomach churn with suspicion. The timestamp showed the vandalism had occurred on a Tuesday afternoon when both Stephanie and Madison claimed to have been shopping together for last-minute wedding accessories. When I called Stephanie to inform her about the dress disaster, her response was immediate crocodile tears and perfectly rehearsed shock. "Oh my God, Becca, who would do such a terrible thing?" she sobbed into the phone. "Mrs. Chen told me that whoever did this must have known exactly where to cut to cause maximum damage. She thinks it was someone who understands fashion construction." The implication was clear, though she never directly accused me. Who else would have both access to the dress location and motivation to sabotage it? Dad's reaction was swift and brutal. He called me into his home office that evening, closing the door with a finality that made my heart race with anxiety. "Rebecca, I've heard about this dress situation, and I've had enough of your attention-seeking behavior," he began with cold fury in his voice. "First, you embarrass us by dating that firefighter. Then you make Madison so uncomfortable with your paranoid accusations that she has to distance herself from you. Now you're sabotaging your own dress to create drama at your sister's wedding." The accusation was so absurd and cruel that I initially thought he must be joking. But his expression remained stone-cold serious as he continued his assault on my character and sanity. "You've been jealous of Stephanie since the engagement was announced, and now you're acting out like a spoiled child who isn't getting enough attention. Well, I won't let you ruin the most important day of her life with your selfishness and manipulation." His punishment was designed to maximize my humiliation while maintaining the appearance of family unity for the wedding guests. "You will not be in the wedding party," he declared with the authority of a judge delivering a sentence. "You will sit with the hotel staff during the ceremony and reception, where you can think about how your behavior has consequences. Maybe watching the celebration from the servants' table will teach you some humility and help you understand your place in this family." The cruelty of this decision extended far beyond the immediate embarrassment. Dad had already informed our extended family about his version of events, telling them that I was having an emotional breakdown and couldn't handle the pressure of being in the wedding party. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who had known me since childhood were now looking at me with pity and concern, believing that I'd somehow lost my mind due to jealousy over my sister's happiness. Aunt Linda, Mom's younger sister who had always been closest to me, tried to intervene on my behalf. She pulled Dad aside during a family dinner and argued that his punishment was too harsh and would only make the situation worse. "Robert, Sarah wouldn't have wanted you to treat Rebecca this way," she said with tears in her eyes. "She's grieving and struggling, but this public humiliation will damage your relationship permanently." Dad's response to Aunt Linda revealed the depths of his transformation since Mom's death. "Sarah isn't here to see how Rebecca has turned out, and maybe that's a blessing," he said with shocking coldness. "I'm responsible for both my daughters now, and I won't let Rebecca's jealousy and instability ruin Stephanie's future. If Linda wants to enable Rebecca's bad behavior, she's welcome to stay home from the wedding as well." The threat worked perfectly. Aunt Linda backed down rather than risk being excluded from the family entirely, leaving me without any allies or advocates. The message was clear to everyone: support Dad's narrative completely, or face exile from the family circle. The power dynamics had shifted permanently in favor of those willing to maintain the fiction that I was the problem. My lowest point came the night before the wedding when I seriously considered not attending at all. The humiliation of sitting with the hired help while my family pretended I didn't exist seemed too much to bear. I drafted a text message to Dad explaining that I was too ill to attend, thinking that my absence might actually be preferable to the spectacle he had planned. But Stephanie had one final manipulation to deploy. She appeared at my apartment that evening with tears streaming down her face and desperation in her voice. "Becca, please don't abandon me tomorrow," she pleaded. "I know Dad is being harsh, but I need my sister there on the most important day of my life. Mom would have wanted us to be together, no matter what problems we're having." The invocation of our dead mother was the perfect emotional manipulation, and Stephanie knew it. Mom had always emphasized the importance of family loyalty and forgiveness, and she would have been heartbroken to see us divided during such a significant milestone. Stephanie's tears seemed genuine in that moment, and I allowed myself to believe that perhaps she truly did want me there and regretted the events that had led to this point. "I promise things will get better after the wedding," Stephanie continued, taking my hands in hers with sisterly affection I hadn't felt in months. "Once all this stress is over, we can work on rebuilding our relationship and being the family Mom would have wanted us to be. But I need you there tomorrow, even if Dad is making things difficult. Please don't let his anger keep you away from me." Against my better judgment and every instinct for self-preservation, I agreed to attend the wedding. Stephanie's manipulation had worked perfectly, ensuring that I would be present for my own humiliation rather than avoiding it through absence. She left my apartment that night with a satisfied smile that should have warned me about what was really coming. The morning of Stephanie's wedding dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect weather that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. Despite everything that had happened, I arrived at the Morrison Grand Hotel at 7 in the morning to help with last-minute preparations, still clinging to the hope that family loyalty might somehow redeem this situation. The hotel was magnificent, with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and marble floors that reflected the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The bridal suite was a flurry of activity when I knocked on the door, carrying coffee and pastries I'd picked up from Stephanie's favorite bakery as a peace offering. Professional makeup artists, hairstylists, and photographers moved around the space with practiced efficiency, transforming the room into a scene from a luxury wedding magazine. Stephanie sat in the center of it all like a queen holding court, already glowing with professional makeup and an elaborate updo that had taken 2 hours to create. Her friends from college had arrived early to be part of the getting ready festivities, and their presence immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room. Jessica, Stephanie's sorority sister who worked in fashion PR, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain before making her first cutting comment. "Oh, Rebecca, I heard you had some drama with your bridesmaid dress," she said with false sympathy. "Stephanie told us what happened. It must be so embarrassing to have people think you're capable of something like that." The implication was crystal clear, though Jessica was careful to phrase it as concern rather than direct accusation. Meredith, another member of Stephanie's inner circle, joined in with her own passive-aggressive observation. "I just can't imagine being so jealous of my own sister's happiness that I'd try to sabotage her wedding," she said while applying lip gloss in the mirror. "Some people just can't handle it when others have nice things, I guess." Stephanie's response to her friend's cruelty was perhaps the most hurtful part of the entire exchange. Instead of defending me or asking them to stop, she simply smiled and shrugged as if their behavior was completely reasonable. "Rebecca's been going through a difficult time since her relationship ended," she said with fake concern. "I'm just grateful she's here today despite everything that's happened." The phrase, "despite everything that's happened," was particularly insidious because it implied that I had done something wrong requiring forgiveness, rather than acknowledging that I was the victim of sabotage and manipulation. Stephanie was allowing her friends to attack me while positioning herself as the magnanimous sister who was graciously overlooking my bad behavior. As the morning progressed, the comments became more direct and cruel. When I offered to help with small tasks like organizing jewelry or steaming dresses, Jessica made loud observations about people who try to insert themselves into situations where they're not really wanted. Meredith suggested that I might be mentally unstable and needed professional help to deal with my obvious jealousy issues. The psychological pressure was enormous, especially since I was trapped in this room for hours with no escape and no allies. Every attempt I made to contribute or be helpful was met with suspicion or mockery. When I complimented Stephanie's dress, Jessica wondered aloud if I was being sarcastic. When I offered to run errands, Meredith suggested that I might accidentally cause problems that would require fixing. The dress situation became the final humiliation of the morning. Since my bridesmaid dress had been destroyed, Dad had arranged for me to wear something from the hotel's Lost and Found collection, claiming it was the best solution given the short timeline. The dress he'd selected was a plain black number that was 2 sizes too large and at least 10 years out of style. The fabric was polyester rather than silk, the color was completely wrong for a wedding, and the fit was so poor that I looked like a child wearing adult clothing. When I emerged from the bathroom wearing this ill-fitting garment, the room fell silent for a moment before Jessica burst into barely controlled laughter. "Oh wow," she said with fake concern, "that's really unfortunate. You look like you're going to a funeral instead of a wedding." Meredith added her own observation with cruel precision. "I guess this is what happens when you don't take care of your responsibilities properly." Stephanie's reaction was the most devastating of all. She looked at me with what appeared to be genuine pity and disappointment, as if my appearance was a personal failure rather than the result of deliberate sabotage. "Oh, Becca," she said with a sigh, "I wish things had worked out differently. But I guess this is just how it has to be." The wedding ceremony itself was a masterclass in public humiliation disguised as family celebration. While Stephanie walked down the aisle in her $10,000 gown with 7 bridesmaids in matching sage green silk, I sat in the very back row of the ballroom, separated from the family section by several rows of Derek's business associates and college friends. The symbolism was unmistakable. I had been relegated to the status of distant acquaintance rather than immediate family member. During the reception, the seating arrangement became the ultimate expression of Dad's punishment. I was led to a small round table position directly next to the kitchen doors, where the hotel service staff took their breaks between courses. The waiters and busboys were confused and sympathetic when they realized I was supposed to be sitting with them rather than at one of the guest tables. Marcus, a veteran waiter who had worked at the hotel for 15 years, quietly asked if there had been some mistake with the seating chart. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here, miss?" he said with genuine concern. This table is usually reserved for staff members who are taking breaks during service. The family tables are all in the front section near the dance floor. I had to explain that this was intentional, that my father had specifically requested this seating arrangement as punishment for unspecified bad behavior. Marcus looked genuinely shocked and uncomfortable, clearly recognizing the cruelty of the situation but unsure how to respond appropriately. The other staff members avoided eye contact, sensing that they were witnessing something private and painful that they had no power to address. From my position at the staff table, I had a perfect view of the head table where my family sat in their finery, toasting Stephanie's happiness and celebrating her bright future. Dad stood to give a speech that felt like a knife through my heart. "Today I'm celebrating my daughter Stephanie, who has always made me proud," he announced to the 300 guests. "She's found a wonderful man who appreciates her value and will give her the life she deserves. I'm blessed to have a daughter who understands the importance of family honor and making good choices." The speech was clearly designed to contrast Stephanie's success with my failures, and the implication was obvious to anyone who knew our family dynamics. Dad was publicly celebrating having one good daughter while the other sat in exile at the staff table, wearing a borrowed dress and surrounded by hotel employees rather than family members. My breaking point came during the father-daughter dance when Dad spun Stephanie around the dance floor while she gazed up at him with adoring eyes. The image of their perfect relationship, unmarked by the complications and disappointments that had characterized my own relationship with him, was too much to bear. I stood up from the staff table, ready to leave this humiliation behind forever, when an elegant older gentleman approached with the kind of confident authority that made everyone in the vicinity stop what they were doing and pay attention. The man who approached my table commanded instant respect from every hotel employee in the vicinity. He was tall and distinguished, probably in his early 70s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings. His suit was clearly expensive but understated, and he moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. "Miss Thompson," he said, extending his hand with formal courtesy. "I'm William Morrison, owner of Morrison Grand Hotel and the Morrison Hotel Group. I've been watching the events of this evening with great interest, and I believe we have several important matters to discuss." His voice carried an authority that made the nearby waitstaff immediately straighten up and move away to give us privacy. I was too stunned to do anything but shake his offered hand and stare at him in confusion. William Morrison was a legendary figure in our city's business community, known for building a hotel empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His name was on buildings, charity foundations, and society pages, but he was also famously private and rarely made public appearances. The idea that he would personally approach a disgraced wedding guest sitting at the staff table seemed absolutely surreal. "I realize this must seem very strange to you," Morrison continued, settling into the chair across from me with the ease of someone who owned everything around us. "But I've been observing your family's celebration tonight, and I have information that will fundamentally change your understanding of your current situation. More importantly, I have information about your mother that your father has deliberately kept from you for your entire life." The mention of my mother sent a shock through my system that was almost physical in its intensity. Mom had been the center of my emotional world, and her death 2 years earlier had left a void that I was still struggling to navigate. The idea that there were secrets about her life that I didn't know seemed impossible, but Morrison's serious expression and confident manner suggested he was completely serious about his claims. Morrison glanced around the ballroom, taking in the elaborate decorations and expensive floral arrangements before returning his attention to me. "Your mother, Sarah Morrison Thompson, was my daughter," he said with quiet dignity. "She was my only child, and I loved her more than life itself. What your father has told you about her family history, about why she had no relatives or inheritance, has been a carefully constructed lie designed to keep you under his control." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the room spinning around me as I tried to process what I was hearing. My mother had always claimed that her parents died when she was young and that she had no extended family or inheritance of any kind. This story had been consistent throughout my childhood, and I had never had any reason to question it. The idea that my own grandfather had been alive all these years, watching from a distance while I struggled through family trauma, seemed too enormous to comprehend. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the celebration happening around us. "Mom always said her parents were dead. She said she was alone in the world when she met Dad, and that's why she was so grateful for his family accepting her." Morrison's expression softened with deep sadness as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather portfolio. "Your mother and I had a terrible falling out when she decided to marry your father," he explained with obvious regret in his voice. "I thought she was making a mistake, marrying beneath her social position and giving up her inheritance for a man who could never provide for her properly. I said things I regretted immediately, and in my pride and stubbornness, I cut her off financially and refused to reconcile." He opened the portfolio and showed me photographs I had never seen before, my mother as a young woman in designer gowns at charity galas, standing next to a man I now recognized as a much younger William Morrison. There were pictures of her at horse shows, graduation ceremonies from elite private schools, and family vacations in exotic locations that spoke of enormous wealth and privilege. "Your mother was an heiress, Rebecca," Morrison continued, his voice heavy with 2 decades of regret. "When she turned 25, she was supposed to inherit a trust fund that would have made her financially independent for life. Instead, she chose love over money and married your father without my blessing. I was too proud to admit I was wrong, and she was too proud to come back and ask for forgiveness." The portfolio contained documents that told a story completely different from everything I had believed about my family history. Bank statements showed millions of dollars in trust funds that had been set aside for my mother and her children. Property deeds revealed estates and investments that should have been part of my inheritance. Legal documents outlined a family fortune that had grown substantially over the years, waiting for reconciliation that never came. "I've been watching your family through private investigators since your mother's funeral," Morrison admitted with obvious shame about the surveillance. "I know about your father's treatment of you, his manipulation of your relationships, and tonight's humiliation at the staff table. I also know that your mother left sealed letters with my attorneys, to be given to you when you turn 25, but your father has been intercepting all legal correspondence to prevent you from learning the truth." He handed me a manila envelope that bore my mother's handwriting, my name written in the careful script I remembered from childhood birthday cards and school notes. "These letters explain everything your mother wanted you to know about our family history, your inheritance, and her deepest regrets about the choices that kept us apart. She never stopped loving you, Rebecca, and she never stopped hoping that someday we might all be reunited as a family." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and began reading my mother's words, written in her final weeks as she battled the cancer that would ultimately take her life. The letters revealed a woman torn between love for her family and grief over the relationship she'd lost with her own father. She wrote about her regret over letting pride keep our family divided and her hope that after her death, Morrison and I might find a way to heal the wounds that had separated us for so long. "Your trust fund has been growing for 26 years, Morrison continued as I read through my mother's emotional revelations. "With compound interest and careful investment, it's now worth approximately $12 million. More importantly, there's a position waiting for you in the Morrison Hotel Group whenever you're ready to claim your birthright and learn the family business that should have been your heritage all along." The magnitude of what Morrison was revealing made my head spin with disbelief and possibility. In the space of 20 minutes, my entire understanding of my identity, my family history, and my future prospects had been completely overturned. The grandfather I'd never known existed was offering me wealth beyond my imagination and a family connection I'd been denied my entire life. But why now? I asked, still struggling to process the enormity of these revelations. Why reveal all this tonight, in the middle of Stephanie's wedding, instead of approaching me privately? Morrison's expression hardened as he looked toward the head table where Dad was raising another toast to Stephanie's happiness. "Because I've watched your father's cruelty reach a breaking point tonight," he said with controlled anger. "Making you sit with the hotel staff while your family celebrates 50 feet away is psychological abuse designed to break your spirit completely. I won't stand by and watch Robert Thompson destroy my granddaughter the way he destroyed my relationship with my daughter. The conversation was interrupted by Derek's best man beginning another round of toasts, but Morrison gestured for us to continue our discussion in a private dining room away from the celebration. As we walked through the hotel corridors, past elegant artwork and crystal chandeliers that now belonged to my family legacy, I began to understand the true scope of what had been hidden from me for my entire life. In the privacy of Morrison's executive suite, with its panoramic view of the city skyline, my grandfather laid out 26 years of carefully documented evidence that revealed the true scope of my father's manipulation and deceit. The mahogany conference table was covered with photographs, financial records, private investigator reports, and legal documents that painted a picture of systematic psychological abuse designed to keep me isolated and dependent. Your father has known about my wealth and your inheritance since before you were born, Morrison began, opening a thick file folder that contained correspondence dating back to my parents' early marriage. He's deliberately intercepted every attempt I've made to establish contact with you, including birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and legal notices about your trust fund. Robert Thompson has spent your entire life ensuring that you would never learn about your true family heritage or financial independence. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Morrison showed me copies of birthday cards he'd sent every year since my birth, returned unopened with "no longer at this address" written in Dad's handwriting despite the fact that we'd never moved from our family home. There were records of college tuition payments he'd attempted to make on my behalf, rejected by Dad who claimed I didn't need financial assistance from strangers. Most painful of all were the flowers and condolence cards Morrison had tried to send when Mom died, all returned without ever reaching me. The private investigators I hired have documented your father's pattern of emotional manipulation and financial control, Morrison continued, showing me surveillance photographs and detailed reports about our family dynamics. He systematically destroyed your confidence, isolated you from potential allies, and created a narrative that positions you as the problem in every family conflict. Tonight's humiliation at the staff table was just the most visible example of abuse that's been ongoing for years. The reports revealed details about my life that I hadn't realized were being observed and documented. There were records of Dad's confrontation with Jake, including audio recordings that proved Dad had threatened Jake with false police reports if he didn't end our relationship. There was documentation of Madison's recruitment as a spy, with financial records showing Stephanie had paid her $3,000 for information about my private conversations and activities. Your father's manipulation extends far beyond emotional abuse, Morrison explained as he showed me financial documents that revealed the true scope of Dad's deception. He's been claiming you as a dependent on his taxes despite the fact that you've been financially independent since college. He's taken out loans using your credit history, and he's established business partnerships based on false claims about your family's financial resources. The business partnership revelation was particularly shocking. Morrison's investigators had discovered that Dad had been telling potential business associates that his family had connections to the Morrison Hotel Group, implying that he had access to my grandfather's wealth and influence for investment opportunities. He'd used this fictional connection to secure favorable loan terms and business deals, essentially profiting from a relationship that he'd actively prevented from existing. Morrison's voice grew cold with controlled anger as he revealed the most devastating evidence of Dad's schemes. The elaborate wedding you're witnessing tonight was partially financed through fraudulent means, he said, showing me loan documents and financial records. Your father has been inflating construction costs on his business projects and skimming money to pay for Stephanie's wedding expenses. He's also taken out personal loans using false information about his family's assets and income, specifically claiming that you have access to inheritance money that he could guarantee. The wedding bills told a story of systematic fraud designed to create the appearance of wealth that didn't actually exist. Dad had been paying vendors with borrowed money while telling them that his family's connections guaranteed payment. He'd inflated costs on his construction contracts to cover wedding expenses, essentially stealing money from his clients to fund Stephanie's fairy tale celebration. The most cruel irony, Morrison continued with obvious disgust, is that while Robert was lying about having access to our family's wealth, he was simultaneously denying you access to wealth that legally belongs to you. He's been stealing money while preventing you from claiming money that's rightfully yours, all to maintain psychological control over your life choices and future prospects. Morrison showed me copies of Jake's police interviews, conducted by private investigators who had interviewed him after Dad's threats ended our relationship. Jake had been genuinely terrified by Dad's claims that he could fabricate evidence of stalking or harassment, and the recordings revealed the specific threats Dad had made to destroy Jake's career and reputation if he didn't cooperate with the breakup demand. Jake Martinez is a good man who was terrorized into abandoning someone he loved, Morrison said with sympathy in his voice. Your father specifically targeted his insecurities about financial stability and social class, using psychological warfare to convince him that staying with you would ruin both your lives. The fact that Jake chose to protect you by accepting the breakup, rather than fighting back against the threats, shows the quality of his character and the depth of his feelings for you. The revelation about Jake's motivations recontextualized everything I'd believed about our relationship ending. He hadn't been swayed by Dad's money or convinced that I was too good for him. He'd been systematically threatened and intimidated until he believed that staying with me would result in destruction for both of us. Dad had weaponized Jake's love for me against him, making him believe that the only way to protect me was to let me go. Morrison's investigation had also uncovered the truth about the bridesmaid dress incident and Madison's role in the sabotage. Security footage from multiple locations had tracked Madison's movements on the day my dress was destroyed, proving that she had been in the vicinity of the alterations shop during the time window when the vandalism occurred. Financial records showed that Stephanie had made a cash payment to Madison the day after the dress incident, disguised as a loan but clearly payment for services rendered. Madison Chen was paid $5,000 to destroy your dress and provide testimony that would support the narrative of you sabotaging your own garments, Morrison explained with disgust. She was also given a written promise of employment at Derek's family business, contingent on her successful completion of various tasks designed to isolate and humiliate you throughout the wedding planning process. The systematic nature of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Every setback and humiliation I'd experienced over the past 3 months had been carefully orchestrated by people I trusted, designed to break my spirit and justify increasingly harsh treatment. The destruction of my dress hadn't been the final straw that prompted Dad's punishment, it had been the planned culmination of a campaign designed to provide justification for my public humiliation. I could have intervened earlier, Morrison admitted with obvious regret and self-recrimination. I could have approached you directly and revealed the truth about your inheritance and family history. But I was waiting for the right moment, hoping that your father might eventually develop some decency and treat you with the respect you deserve. Tonight's display of cruelty convinced me that intervention was necessary to prevent further psychological damage. Morrison offered me a choice that seemed almost surreal in its life-changing potential. You can walk away from this wedding quietly, claim your inheritance, and build a new life with the resources and family support that should have been available to you all along, he said with quiet dignity. Or you can choose to confront your father publicly and expose his lies and manipulation in front of everyone who has witnessed your humiliation tonight. The decision felt enormous, with implications that would affect the rest of my life and my relationships with every member of my extended family. Walking away quietly would preserve some family relationships and avoid public scandal, but it would also allow Dad's narrative about my character and behavior to remain unchallenged. Confronting him publicly would provide justice and vindication, but it would also destroy any possibility of future reconciliation with Stephanie and other family members who had participated in my abuse. I need you to understand something important, Morrison said as I wrestled with this momentous choice. Your mother's greatest regret was allowing pride and stubbornness to keep our family divided for so many years. She wrote extensively about her hope that you would choose healing over revenge, reconciliation over retaliation, when the truth about our family finally came to light. But even as he encouraged me to consider the higher path of forgiveness and quiet dignity, Morrison's own anger was evident in his voice and expression. However, he continued with steel in his voice, I've watched Robert Thompson systematically destroy my granddaughter's confidence and self-worth for 26 years. I've seen him use psychological manipulation and emotional abuse to maintain control over your life choices and future prospects. If you choose to fight back against this treatment, you'll have every resource of the Morrison family behind you. The weight of this decision, combined with the emotional overload of learning about my true family history and the systematic nature of Dad's manipulation, left me feeling simultaneously empowered and overwhelmed. For the first time in my adult life, I had real choices and the resources to enforce those choices, but I also had to confront the reality that my entire understanding of my family relationships had been built on lies and manipulation. After 26 years of being told I was the problem, the disappointment, the one who didn't measure up to family expectations, I found myself with the power to finally set the record straight in the most public way possible. Morrison had given me a choice, but as I sat in his executive suite looking out at the city lights, watching my family continue their celebration while I remained in exile, the decision became clear. He humiliated me in front of 300 people, I said to Morrison, my voice growing stronger with each word. He made me sit with the hotel staff while he toasted his good daughter who makes him proud. Everyone in that ballroom thinks I'm jealous, unstable, and unworthy of basic family respect. If I walk away quietly, that narrative stands forever, and every person down there goes home believing his version of who I am. Morrison nodded with understanding and what looked like approval. Your mother was conflict-averse and chose to suffer in silence rather than fight back against people who mistreated her, he said with sadness in his voice. It's one of her few qualities I hope you haven't inherited completely. Sometimes, Rebecca, people who abuse their power only respond to having that power challenged publicly. We returned to the ballroom together, Morrison's presence immediately shifting the atmosphere in the room as hotel staff and guests recognized the owner of the establishment. Dad was in the middle of another toast when he noticed Morrison approaching the microphone at the head table, and his face went pale as he realized that someone with authority far greater than his own was about to address his celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom and cutting through the conversation and laughter. I apologize for interrupting this lovely celebration, but I have an announcement that I believe will interest everyone present, particularly those who have been concerned about the Thompson family dynamics that have been on display tonight. The room fell completely silent, with 300 guests turning their attention to this distinguished older gentleman who commanded respect through presence alone. Dad started to protest, but Morrison continued with the kind of authority that made interruption impossible. I'm William Morrison, owner of this hotel and grandfather to Rebecca Thompson, who some of you may have noticed has been seated with the hotel staff this evening, he announced, gesturing toward my table in the back corner. I'd like to share some information about why that seating arrangement occurred and what it reveals about certain family members' character and truthfulness. The gasps and murmurs that rippled through the crowd were audible as guests tried to process what they were hearing. Dad's face had gone from pale to red with rage, but he remained frozen in his seat as Morrison continued his systematic dismantling of the evening's narrative. Rebecca Thompson is my granddaughter and the sole heir to a $12 million trust fund that has been kept from her through 26 years of deliberate deception by her father, Morrison announced with devastating clarity. She is also the victim of systematic emotional abuse designed to keep her isolated, dependent, and unaware of her true family heritage and financial independence. Morrison gestured for me to join him at the microphone, and as I walked through the ballroom toward the head table, I could feel every eye in the room following my progress. The whispers and shocked expressions of the wedding guests provided a stark contrast to the confident stride I felt for the first time in months. Robert Thompson has spent years lying to business associates about having connections to my family wealth, Morrison continued as I reached the front of the room. He has financed tonight's celebration through fraudulent loans and stolen money, while simultaneously denying his daughter access to inheritance money that legally belongs to her. Dad finally found his voice, standing up from his seat with trembling hands and desperate anger. This is insane, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. This man is lying. He abandoned Sarah years ago and now he's trying to destroy our family with these ridiculous accusations. Morrison's response was calm and devastating. Mr. Thompson, I have 26 years of documentation proving every claim I've made tonight, he said, pulling out copies of the evidence we'd reviewed in his office. I have recordings of your threats against Mr. Martinez, financial records of your fraudulent business practices, and testimony from Madison Chen about the money you paid her to spy on Rebecca and sabotage her bridesmaid dress. The mention of the dress sabotage sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the crowd, and I noticed several wedding guests turning to look at Madison, who had gone completely white and was slowly backing toward the exit. Stephanie jumped up from her seat, her wedding dress rustling as she moved, her face a mask of panic and fury. You're ruining my wedding, she screamed at both Morrison and me, her careful composure completely shattered. This was supposed to be my day. My perfect day. And you're destroying it with these lies and manipulations. Her true character was finally visible to everyone in the room, the sweet and innocent facade replaced by ugly rage and entitlement. Morrison addressed Stephanie with the kind of cold courtesy reserved for people who have revealed their worst selves publicly. Miss Thompson, your wedding was financed through fraud and built on a foundation of systematic cruelty toward your sister, he said with devastating calm. If that's the kind of celebration you wanted, then perhaps it's appropriate that the truth is being revealed in front of all your guests. Derek, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally stood up and addressed his bride with obvious horror and disgust. Stephanie, is this true? He asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. Did you really pay someone to spy on your sister and destroy her dress? Did your father really threaten Rebecca's boyfriend and steal money to pay for our wedding? Stephanie's response revealed the depths of her selfishness and lack of empathy. So what if I did? She shouted, abandoning any pretense of innocence or regret. Rebecca has been jealous and bitter about my engagement since the day it was announced. She deserved everything that happened to her. She was trying to ruin my happiness, so I made sure she couldn't. The ugly truth was finally out in the open for everyone to see. Stephanie wasn't a victim of family drama or an innocent party caught up in unfortunate circumstances. She was an active participant in a deliberate campaign of psychological abuse designed to break her own sister's spirit and confidence. Derek's family, sitting at their designated tables in their expensive formal wear, looked mortified as they realized they had been celebrating a union built on fraud and cruelty. Derek's mother stood up from her table and addressed Stephanie with ice-cold disgust. We will not be associated with this kind of behavior, she announced loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. The Hartwell family does not condone fraud, manipulation, or the systematic abuse of family members. Dad made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative, pulling out his phone and threatening to call security. I'm having you removed from this hotel, he shouted at Morrison with laughable irony. You can't come into my daughter's wedding and spread these lies. Morrison's response was swift and final. Mr. Thompson, I own this hotel, he said with quiet authority. Hotel security works for me, and they will be escorting you from the premises for fraud and disturbing the peace. You are also banned from all Morrison Hotel Group properties effective immediately. As if summoned by his words, hotel security appeared at the edges of the ballroom, clearly responding to signals Morrison had given earlier. The sight of uniformed security guards moving toward the head table sent another wave of shock through the wedding guests, many of whom were now pulling out their phones to record the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. What followed was a systematic destruction of every lie and manipulation Dad had built his authority upon, delivered with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Morrison had clearly been planning this confrontation for some time, and he had documentation ready for every claim Dad might make in his defense. The construction business you're so proud of has been systematically defrauding clients for the past 2 years, Morrison announced, producing financial records that showed inflated costs and stolen materials. You've been skimming money from every project to fund your lifestyle and tonight's celebration, while telling your clients that delays and cost overruns were due to circumstances beyond your control. Dad's business associates, several of whom were present as wedding guests, looked increasingly uncomfortable as Morrison detailed the scope of the fraud. These were men who had trusted Dad with significant projects and substantial financial investments, and they were now learning that their business partner had been stealing from them to pay for his daughter's wedding. Morrison continued his methodical destruction of Dad's reputation and credibility. "You've also been lying to the Internal Revenue Service about your family's financial situation," he announced, producing tax documents that revealed years of false claims. "You've been declaring Rebecca as a dependent while she's been financially independent, and you've been claiming business deductions for personal expenses related to maintaining a lifestyle you can't actually afford." The tax fraud revelation was particularly damaging because it implied criminal liability rather than just unethical behavior. Several guests who worked in finance and accounting were visibly shocked by the implications, recognizing that Dad was facing potential federal charges in addition to the immediate social consequences of his exposed lies. But Morrison saved his most devastating revelation for last. "Perhaps most importantly for everyone present tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "Robert Thompson has been operating a pyramid scheme through his construction business, using new client investments to pay off previous clients while skimming money for personal use. Several of the men in this room have invested money in projects that will never be completed because the funds have been stolen." The reaction from Dad's business associates was immediate and violent. 3 men stood up from their tables simultaneously, their faces red with rage as they realized they had been defrauded by someone they considered a friend and trusted partner. The wedding celebration was rapidly turning into a criminal investigation as victims of Dad's schemes began comparing notes and realizing the scope of their losses. Stephanie's world was collapsing as quickly as Dad's. Derek had stepped away from her completely, making it clear to everyone in the room that he wanted no association with her or her family. His parents were already making phone calls to their lawyers, presumably to discuss how to protect their son from any legal consequences of his connection to the Thompson family fraud. "This marriage is over," Derek announced publicly, his voice carrying across the ballroom with finality that left no room for argument. "I will not be associated with fraud, theft, or the kind of cruelty I've witnessed tonight. The wedding gifts will be returned, and the marriage will be annulled immediately." Stephanie's response was pure desperation mixed with ugly entitlement. "You can't leave me," she screamed at Derek, her wedding dress now disheveled from her agitated movements. "We're married. You promised to love me forever. You can't just change your mind because of things my family did." Derek's response was calm and devastating. "I promised to love the person I thought you were," he said with obvious disgust. "I didn't know I was marrying someone who would pay people to torture her own sister and celebrate while her father committed fraud to pay for our wedding. The person I fell in love with doesn't exist." Madison, who had been trying to slip out of the ballroom unnoticed, was stopped by hotel security at Morrison's direction. Her role in the conspiracy was about to be fully exposed, and her attempt to escape only made her look more guilty to the crowd of wedding guests who were now watching every development with rapt attention. Miss Chen was paid $8,000 over 3 months to spy on Rebecca and sabotage her relationship with family members, Morrison announced, producing bank records and copies of text messages between Madison and Stephanie. She provided detailed reports about Rebecca's private conversations, destroyed her bridesmaid dress, and helped create the false narrative that Rebecca was mentally unstable and jealous. Madison's betrayal was now public knowledge, and several mutual friends who were present looked at her with disgust and disbelief. The systematic nature of her deception was particularly shocking because it revealed a level of premeditation and cruelty that went far beyond ordinary friend drama. Dad made one final attempt to salvage the situation by attacking Morrison's motives and credibility. "This man abandoned his daughter when she needed him most," he shouted desperately. "He's a criminal who made his money through illegal means, and now he's trying to destroy an innocent family because he wants to control Rebecca's life." Morrison's response was swift and supported by documentation. "Mr. Thompson, I have copies of every letter, card, and gift I attempted to send to my daughter and granddaughter over the past 26 years, he said, producing a thick folder of returned mail. "All were intercepted and returned by you, with false claims that your family had moved or was no longer interested in contact. You systematically prevented any relationship between Sarah and me, and you've continued that pattern with Rebecca. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Dad had been caught in lie after lie, with documentation supporting every accusation Morrison had made. His credibility was completely destroyed, and even his most loyal supporters in the room were now looking at him with suspicion and disgust. The final blow came when hotel security informed Dad that police officers were waiting outside to discuss the fraud allegations with him. Morrison had clearly coordinated this confrontation with law enforcement, ensuring that Dad would face immediate consequences for his criminal behavior rather than being allowed to escape and continue his schemes. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and theft," the lead security officer announced as police officers entered the ballroom. "You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can be used against you in court." The sight of Dad being handcuffed in front of 300 wedding guests was the final humiliation, the ultimate reversal of the power dynamics that had defined our family for decades. The man who had spent years controlling and manipulating everyone around him was now powerless, facing criminal charges and public disgrace. Stephanie made one last desperate attempt to blame me for the destruction of her wedding and her life. "This is all your fault," she screamed as I stood next to Morrison at the microphone. "You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you destroyed everything. You ruined my wedding, my marriage, and my life because you're jealous and bitter." My response was calm and supported by 26 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "I didn't ruin your wedding, Stephanie," I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "You and Dad ruined your own lives by building everything on lies, fraud, and cruelty. I'm just the person who finally told the truth about who you really are." 6 months later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Morrison Grand Hotel, looking out at the same city skyline I'd admired from my grandfather's suite on the night my life changed forever. But this time I wasn't a victim seeking refuge from family cruelty. I was the newly appointed vice president of operations for the Morrison Hotel Group, learning the family business that should have been my birthright all along. The transformation in my life had been so complete and dramatic that sometimes I still couldn't believe it was real. The woman who had sat in humiliation at the staff table, wearing a borrowed dress and watching her family celebrate without her, had become a competent business executive with a $12 million trust fund and a loving grandfather who was teaching her to navigate the world of luxury hospitality and property development. Morrison had been patient and thorough in helping me understand both our family history and the business empire my mother should have inherited. We spent hours in his office, looking through photo albums and family documents that revealed a heritage of successful, intelligent women who had built and managed substantial businesses across generations. My great-grandmother had been one of the first female hotel developers in the region, and my mother had been groomed from childhood to take over the family empire before love and pride had torn everything apart. "Your mother was brilliant at understanding what guests needed before they knew it themselves," Morrison told me during one of our afternoon training sessions. "She had an intuitive grasp of hospitality that couldn't be taught in business school." I see that same quality in you when you walk through the hotels and notice small details that could be improved. The work was challenging and demanding, requiring me to learn everything from financial management to interior design, from staff psychology to marketing strategy. But for the first time in my adult life, I was being challenged and supported simultaneously, pushed to grow and succeed rather than being undermined and sabotaged at every turn. Jake and I had reconnected almost immediately after Morrison's revelations cleared up the circumstances of our breakup. When Jake learned that Dad had threatened him with false police reports and character assassination, his relief was palpable. He'd spent months believing that he wasn't good enough for me and that staying together would somehow hurt my future prospects. "I thought I was being selfish by wanting to stay with you," Jake confessed during our first real conversation after the wedding disaster. "Your dad convinced me that loving you meant letting you go so you could find someone who could give you the life you deserved. I never imagined that he was lying about everything, including what you actually wanted and needed." Our relationship had required rebuilding from the foundation up, with both of us working through the trauma of being manipulated and separated by people we trusted. But the experience had ultimately strengthened our bond, giving us a shared understanding of how precious and fragile real love could be when surrounded by people willing to destroy it for their own purposes. We'd gotten engaged again 3 months after the wedding confrontation, this time with Morrison's enthusiastic blessing and support. Jake had been nervous about meeting my grandfather, worried that his firefighter's salary and blue-collar background would be looked down upon by someone with Morrison's wealth and social position. But Morrison's response had been exactly the opposite of Dad's class-based prejudices. "Jake Martinez is the kind of man I'd want my granddaughter to marry," Morrison told me privately after their first meeting. "He has integrity, courage, and genuine love for you. Those qualities matter more than bank account balances or social connections." Dad's legal troubles had escalated rapidly after the wedding confrontation. Federal investigators had discovered that his fraud schemes were far more extensive than even Morrison had initially realized, involving multiple states and millions of dollars in stolen money. He was facing potential prison sentences that could last decades, and his construction business had been seized by the government to compensate his victims. Stephanie's life had imploded completely in the aftermath of her wedding disaster. Derek had followed through on his promise to annul their marriage immediately, and his family's social connections had ensured that she was effectively blacklisted from the wealthy circles she'd been desperate to join. Without Dad's stolen money to maintain her lifestyle, she'd been forced to take a retail job at a department store, selling cosmetics to customers who sometimes recognized her from news coverage of the fraud scandal. The contrast between her current situation and the life of luxury she'd been planning was stark and deliberately ironic. The woman who had looked down on Jake for being working class was now working for minimum wage plus commission, dependent on the kindness of customers and the patience of supervisors who knew about her family's legal troubles. Madison faced her own consequences for her role in the conspiracy. Her involvement in the fraud scheme had cost her the human resources job she'd held for 5 years, and the promised position at Derek's family company had disappeared along with Stephanie's marriage. More importantly, news of her betrayal had spread throughout our mutual friend group, leaving her socially isolated and professionally damaged. "I never thought it would go this far," Madison had said during her only attempt to apologize to me, months after the truth came out. "Stephanie made it sound like I was helping with family drama, not participating in fraud and abuse. But I know that's not an excuse for what I did to you." I'd accepted her apology but made it clear that our friendship was over permanently. Trust, once broken so completely and deliberately, couldn't be repaired with words or regret. Madison would have to live with the consequences of choosing money over loyalty, just as Dad and Stephanie would have to face the legal and social repercussions of their cruelty and dishonesty. The healing process had been gradual and supported by professional therapy that helped me understand the psychological impact of growing up in an emotionally abusive environment. Dr. Sarah Chen, a family therapist who specialized in narcissistic abuse recovery, helped me recognize patterns of manipulation and gaslighting that I'd internalized as normal family dynamics. Children who grow up with emotionally abusive parents often develop a distorted sense of their own worth and capabilities, Dr. Chen explained during one of our early sessions. "You spent your entire childhood and young adulthood being told that you were the problem, that your feelings were invalid, and that other people's happiness was more important than your own well-being. Recovering from that kind of systematic undermining takes time and patience with yourself." The therapy sessions were sometimes painful, forcing me to confront how deeply Dad's manipulation had affected my self-perception and my relationships with other people. But they were also liberating, giving me tools to recognize and resist manipulation while building genuine confidence based on real achievements and honest self-assessment. Morrison had been patient and understanding throughout my healing journey, never pressuring me to forgive or forget, but always encouraging me to focus on building a positive future rather than dwelling on past injuries. "Your mother spent too many years being angry about our estrangement," he told me during one of our weekly dinner meetings. "I don't want you to make the same mistake of letting Robert's abuse define the rest of your life." The extended Morrison family had welcomed me with warmth and enthusiasm that felt almost overwhelming after years of conditional acceptance and constant criticism. Cousins, aunts, and uncles I'd never known existed reached out to establish relationships and share family history that had been hidden from me for decades. They brought photos, stories, and traditions that connected me to a heritage of strong, successful women who had built businesses and raised families with dignity and grace. "Your great-aunt Margaret would have loved to meet you," my cousin Patricia told me during a family reunion dinner at Morrison's estate. She started the first hotel management program for women in this state back in 1955. She used to say that hospitality was the perfect business for women because we understand what makes people feel welcome and valued. Planning my second wedding to Jake was an entirely different experience from anything I could have imagined during my first engagement. This time, instead of being marginalized and criticized, I was supported and celebrated by people who genuinely wanted to see me happy. Morrison insisted on hosting the reception at the flagship Morrison Grand Hotel, in the same ballroom where Stephanie's wedding had imploded, transforming a space associated with humiliation into one filled with love and joy. "I want everyone who was present for that disaster to see you celebrating as the woman you were always meant to be," Morrison explained when he offered to pay for everything. "You'll be surrounded by people who love and respect you, wearing a dress you chose yourself, celebrating a marriage built on truth and mutual support." Jake had initially been uncomfortable with the idea of such an elaborate celebration, worried that accepting Morrison's generosity would seem opportunistic or inappropriate. But I'd learned from my grandfather's example that accepting love and support wasn't weakness, it was recognizing that family meant people who wanted to invest in your happiness and success. The wedding planning process became an opportunity to create new traditions and memories with my Morrison family, replacing the painful associations of my first attempt with experiences of genuine joy and collaboration. Instead of being forced into a role I didn't choose, I was making decisions based on my own preferences and values, supported by people who respected my judgment and wanted to help me create the celebration I actually wanted. 3 weeks before our wedding, Jake and I received an unexpected piece of news that provided the final closure to the traumatic events that had brought us together. Dad had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, ensuring that he would face real consequences for the decades of manipulation and abuse he'd inflicted on our family. "I know this doesn't undo the damage he caused," Morrison said when he delivered the news, "but it does ensure that he won't be able to hurt anyone else the way he hurt you and your mother. Sometimes justice takes time, but it eventually finds people who believe they're above consequences." I felt relief rather than satisfaction at Dad's sentencing, grateful that his capacity to manipulate and harm others had been eliminated without feeling vindictive about his suffering. The woman who had grown up desperate for his approval and terrified of his criticism had evolved into someone who could recognize his behavior as his problem rather than her failure. Stephanie had reached out several times in the months leading up to my wedding, alternating between attempts at reconciliation and bitter attacks on my character and choices. Her messages revealed someone still incapable of accepting responsibility for her actions, still convinced that she was the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own destruction. "I know Dad did some wrong things, but you didn't have to destroy our entire family to get revenge," she wrote in her longest attempt at communication. "We could have worked things out privately instead of humiliating everyone in public. Now I have nothing left, and you have everything you ever wanted. I hope you're happy with what you've done." I'd chosen not to respond to Stephanie's messages, recognizing them as attempts to re-establish the dynamic where I was responsible for managing her emotions and fixing problems she'd created for herself. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that engaging with people who refused to acknowledge their own responsibility was a form of enabling that would prevent both of us from moving forward in healthy ways. The night before my wedding, as I sat in my childhood bedroom packing the last of my belongings to move permanently to Morrison's estate, I found a letter my mother had written to me on my 18th birthday, hidden in a jewelry box I hadn't opened in years. Her words seemed prophetic in light of everything that had happened since her death. "My darling Rebecca," the letter began in Mom's careful handwriting, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you to guide you through life's challenges. I hope you know that you were the greatest joy of my life, and I'm proud of the strong, intelligent woman I know you'll become. Don't let anyone, including family members, convince you that you're less valuable than you truly are. You have the strength and wisdom to create the life you deserve, surrounded by people who recognize your worth. The letter continued with specific advice about trusting my instincts, standing up for myself, and choosing relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. It was as if Mom had somehow known that I would need these exact words at this exact moment in my life, when I was preparing to marry the man I loved and claim the family heritage that should have been mine all along. Our wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with autumn sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Morrison Grand Hotel's bridal suite. As I sat in the same chair where Stephanie had held court 6 months earlier, surrounded by my Morrison cousins and genuine friends who had supported me through the most difficult period of my life, I marveled at how completely my circumstances had changed. Jake's mother and sisters had embraced me as family from the moment they learned the truth about Dad's threats and manipulation. We always knew something was wrong when Jake came home so heartbroken, his mother Maria told me during our engagement celebration. He's never been the kind of man to give up on love easily, so we suspected someone had hurt him badly. We're just grateful you found your way back to each other. The ceremony itself took place in Morrison Grand Hotel's garden terrace, overlooking the city where both Jake and I had been born and raised but which now felt like the beginning of a completely new life. Morrison walked me down the aisle with pride and joy radiating from his face, finally getting to participate in a family milestone that connected him to the daughter he'd lost and the granddaughter he'd found. Jake's eyes filled with tears when he saw me approaching in the wedding dress I'd chosen myself, a simple but elegant design that reflected my actual taste rather than someone else's vision of what I should want. This marriage was built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine love, without the undercurrent of manipulation and control that had characterized my family relationships for so long. During our reception, Morrison gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, including mine. 2 years ago, I was a lonely old man with more money than family, convinced that pride and stubbornness had cost me the most important relationships in my life, he said, raising his glass to Jake and me. Tonight, I'm celebrating the marriage of my granddaughter to a man who loves her the way she deserves to be loved, surrounded by family and friends who will support their happiness for decades to come. As Jake and I danced to our first song as husband and wife, I thought about the woman who had sat at the staff table 6 months earlier, convinced that she was unworthy of love and respect, isolated from her family and disconnected from her true heritage. That woman had believed she was the problem, the disappointment, the one who couldn't live up to expectations or deserve better treatment. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate, requiring months of therapy, legal battles, and the gradual process of rebuilding relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. But it had been worth every difficult conversation and painful revelation to reach this point of genuine happiness and authentic family connection. Morrison's investigation had revealed that Mom had left detailed instructions about how she wanted me to be told about our family history, including her hope that learning the truth would help me understand my own worth and capabilities. She'd written extensively about her regrets over the estrangement with her father and her determination that I shouldn't repeat the same pattern of letting pride and stubbornness destroy family relationships. Your mother's greatest wish was that you would have the courage to claim your heritage and build the life you truly wanted, Morrison had told me while we planned the wedding. She knew that Robert's treatment of you was damaging your confidence and self-perception, but she hoped that eventually you would find your way to the strength and independence that have always been your birthright. 3 months after our wedding, Jake and I purchased a beautiful home in the historic district, close enough to Morrison's estate for regular family dinners but far enough away to maintain our independence and privacy. The house had a large garden where I could practice the landscaping skills Morrison was teaching me as part of my hotel management training, and a workshop where Jake could pursue his woodworking hobby when he wasn't fighting fires. The life we were building together was everything I'd dreamed of during the darkest period of my relationship with Dad and Stephanie, a partnership based on mutual respect and support, financial security earned through honest work, and family relationships characterized by love rather than obligation or fear. We were planning to start a family in the next year, and Morrison was already talking excitedly about becoming a great-grandfather and passing down family traditions to a new generation. Looking back on that night at Stephanie's wedding, sitting at the staff table in a borrowed dress while my family celebrated without me, I realized it had been the moment my real life began. The humiliation that was supposed to break my spirit had instead been the catalyst for discovering my true identity and claiming the family heritage that had been hidden from me for 26 years. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest transformations, and sometimes the people who try hardest to diminish us end up revealing our true strength and resilience. Dad and Stephanie had spent years convincing me that I was unworthy of love and respect, but their cruelty had ultimately connected me with people who recognized my real value and wanted to support my happiness and success. That night at the staff table was the last time I ever let anyone make me feel less than worthy of love, respect, and the good things life has to offer. It was the end of accepting manipulation disguised as family loyalty, and the beginning of understanding that real love doesn't require earning through perfect behavior or maintaining through constant sacrifice. Have you ever experienced a moment where what seemed like your lowest point actually became the beginning of your greatest transformation? Share your story in the comments below, and let me know what you think about families who use love as a weapon of control. Don't forget to like this video if Rebecca's journey of finding her true worth resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family manipulation and discovering your authentic power. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that they deserve better treatment than they're receiving, because sometimes the most important lesson is learning that we don't have to accept cruelty from people who claim to love us. Thank you for joining me for this incredible story of betrayal, revelation, and ultimate triumph. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself once you understand your true value.